I have you now.
They want to mess with my droid. They're going to pay for it.
This is the way.
You may fire when ready.
Blow that piece of junk out of the sky!
The way you're fighting, you wouldn't have lasted long.
Hello there.
Kenobi!
The ability to speak does not make you intelligent.
The battle between the Jedi and the Sith with a twist. A great novel set between the original trilogy and the sequels that bring together two of the best characters from the original trilogy and fills in a lot of information that we needed for the sequel trilogy. This is the Star Wars Station Communication Podcast, and we are giving you our Shadow of the Sith book review. My name's Carter. I'm here with my co-host Colin, and we just finished this phenomenal book, and we're ready to talk about it.
Yeah, and phenomenal is kind of an understatement. We get a lot of insights to a lot of concepts here that, in my opinion, we've been screaming for. Answers a lot of questions that we're going to get into.
Yes, it does. Absolutely. It is really, really, it's a well put together book. I think that we had a great foray from Adam Christopher into this first novel, Star Wars novel of his. He's written in some of the Star Wars comics. He wrote for the Star Wars book that came out From a Certain Point of View. He wrote one of the short stories in that. But this is his first full-length Star Wars novel. And I think he knocked it out of the park. I think he did a wonderful job, and with such a cool concept and such a necessary story to tell for us.
Yeah, you couldn't have said it any better. And is there any bad characters in here? It has highs and lows. It has really sad parts, really good parts, and some really deep things that you have to really peel back the layers to even see, if you ask me, which we're going to get into. Stay tuned.
Yeah, no, absolutely. We are going to get into that. It's a fun ride from start to finish. I want to go through just how much I thought about this book, because it's a story of loss for every character nearly, and it's about how they cope with loss. It is a very interesting read. The two bad guys, we have two villain stories running at the same time, and basically two hero stories running at the same time, but they all weave together in a very complicated web, and there's a lot of moving from place to place, never meeting. It's a lot of like General Grievous and Anakin never meeting. There's a lot of that going on in here, but it works really well.
But it results in a really high adventure that is very riveting from start to finish.
Well, that's one of the things that I think this book, of all the Star Wars books that I've read in the new canon and in the old canon, this book felt the most like Legends to me. This book feels like a grand adventure that they're able to tell. It doesn't have to be on a movie screen. And not to say, obviously, the movie screens deserve the biggest stories. That's where Star Wars is. That's where it came from. That's what it'll always be. But for a long time, we had the Legends novels telling giant, epic stories that had our titular favorite characters as focal points. And we hadn't really gotten that while Disney was putting out the movies. But now that the movies kind of stopped, we've started to see these big books that tell the story of our characters and our big characters and their big stories, and they feel good. And so I think Shadows of the Sith feels the most like a Legends novel to me. Also with how much it ties into the universe. It ties into the sequel and the original trilogy very well, but it ties into so much. It weaves canon in and out from the video games and comics and other books. It's a really fun read.
I really liked how all the holes that it filled. And just a note to our listeners here, this is going to be full of spoilers. So if you have any reservations, go read the book.
Yeah, no, this is going to be a spoiler review. We're going basically, not chapter by chapter specifically, but we're going plot and arc through the plot. We're going to take you all the way through the book. And so if you don't want to be spoiled, this is not the podcast for you. Not this episode of this podcast.
Yeah, well, listen to it anyway, because we want feedback on our concepts we talk about here. We want to discuss it, jump in on our Discord, find our link tree, and let's get after it.
Yeah. All right. Well, let's hop in. But no, I want to hear you talk a little bit more first about what you thought of how it filled the holes. Because I did a superb job
So this is Rey's origin story, and she's not even a major part of this, but it starts out of where she and her parents were being pursued by Ochi of Bestoon, who is a phenomenal character. He's wild. I can't think of good adjectives to describe him exactly, but there's just too many. But we get to see this is before she was left on Jakku, and who her parents were, and the trials that they faced, how her parents met, and that story was. This is something we needed to see, in my opinion. Except we only saw a glimpse of it in the movies, and now we get to fill it all in our heads by what was written here, how they looked and how they acted, and what kind of pressures there. Why did they leave her on Jakku? And there's so much to it, like who Dathan was. Dathan was her dad. He was a Strandcast. And there's a lot to be said about that. You can go down a big hole. You find out who her mom was, Miramir, where she was from, what motivated them to do what they do, and how they ended the way they did. It's very sad.
Yeah, no, you're absolutely right. This, the book itself really fills important holes, not just for Rey, but for Exegol and what it is, and the Darth Vader 2020 comics that is an ongoing series right now is doing a big lift in filling in Exegol holes, and this book might as well be a tie-in to that comic series, because the Darth Vader 2020 comic series and this book have so much in common. They're talking about the same things, they're filling in the same gaps that we have between the original trilogy and the sequels, and they're doing it in a really interesting and cool way. I mean, this may be the canon novel that we have that delves the most into Sith culture and Sith lore, and we have a whole canon novel called Lords of the Sith. And I think this book does a better job than that one.
Exactly. This is another hole filled. In the movies, it was just, here's Exegol, here's Palpatine, here's his massive fleet of Star Destroyers, and so you had to basically surmise yourself and amongst your friends. We saw the cultists. All these people built all these Star Destroyers with mega weapons. Yes. How did they do that? Well, this, even this one doesn't go into much detail as some nerds probably want, like me. But we get to see what life was like on Exegol and what some of the motivations of clone Palpatine were. And what an arduous task. Like Darth Vader went to Exegol. And you just didn't casually go. There's only 2 Sith Wayfinders in existence. And in the end, what a big deal was it for all this whole fleet of ships to show up to counter them. So there's so many holes that are filled here that we get answers for finally in this book.
Yes. No, you're absolutely right. I think, so this book has some dark themes, and it has some great Jedi moments. We get a lot of exploration of what Luke was doing at the time. But the quote at the very beginning of the book sums this book up perfectly. After you've read the book, you need to read that quote again, and you're totally going to have a different outlook on it. Because that quote at the beginning of the book, which I'll read in just a moment, is actually an excerpt from the Revenge of the Sith novelization, which is super popular. If you haven't read the Revenge of the Sith novelization, it's definitely the best novelization of any Star Wars film. It adds so much detail, it adds so much interaction between the characters, and it's very popular. But Adam Christopher and the Shadows of the Sith team put an excerpt from that novelization as a quote warning at the beginning of the book. And so I'm going to read that real quick. And in the end, you cannot touch the shadow. In the end, you do not even want to. In the end, the shadow is all you have left, because the shadow understands you, the shadow forgives you, the shadow gathers you unto itself, and within your furnace heart you burn in your own flame. A warning from a darker time. So that's a direct excerpt from the Revenge of the Sith novelization, but is that not exactly what's happening to both the villains and Lando in the whole novel?
Yeah, no, that's super deep.
I know.
Very insightful, very dark.
To be written in a book in 2005 that has nothing to do with this book. It's like the perfect quote. It's like it's designed for this book. It's like it just relates so well to the conflict that all of the characters are going through. That Lando and both the villains are moving through a shadow. They're moving through the shadow of the Sith, what the Sith have done. All three characters, and this is, Luke is a main focus of this book, but Luke has the Jedi mindset and the Jedi morals, and he obviously has faults and flaws, but he's not a vessel for the loss that the other three characters are. The other three characters' lives were directly negatively affected by the Sith. Both the villains and Lando had something terrible happen to them because of the Sith, and now they are living in the shadow of the Sith.
Yeah, great point.
So we begin the book in Wild Space with two characters that you don't know who they are. They're traveling through trying to figure out where to go. You know that they only have 2 jumps left, and they're obviously being tracked. They run across the New Republic, and the New Republic points them in what direction they need to go. And we find out right towards the end, you start to get a realization that, oh, this is Rey and her parents. And you have no idea. Obviously, you know they're fleeing the Sith because we know that Ochi hunted them down from Rise of Skywalker. But this is just where the book takes off, and it starts moving in that direction. And you get a really close, intimate look into Rey's parents, and Rey's mother is a phenomenal pilot. And so this fills in some of the complaints about Rey's knowledge of piloting things.
And a couple of notes here. The ship they're in is a piece of junk. It's on its last legs. So they're not able to escape. It's not like the Millennium Falcon where they just hit a button or punch a couple panels and poof, they're 13 parsecs later able to get where they want to go. It's just like, hold your breath. Let's hope this even turns on, And then the other thing is the Republic is a huge government. It's benevolent, but also indifferent. And they show up. The Republic helps them, but it ain't much. It's kind of shocking to see. We're going to get more into it.
And this is not the fledgling New Republic government of The Mandalorian.
Yeah.
This is not the 4-year-old New Republic. This is the New Republic into its 16th year of government. And so they should have a handle on things like this.
Yeah, and so it's kind of striking to see how the indifference they were, especially, I don't know, we'll get more into it.
Well, and Mon Mothma's demilitarization has become a big theme in a lot of books. We did a Last Shot review. It's on this channel. And that talks a lot about Mon Mothma's push to demilitarize. Now that we've seen more of Mon Mothma's character in Andor, we kind of see what she's about, and we have a way deeper understanding of her. And I think that this book, it doesn't mention any of that directly, but you can just see the way the New Republic is operating right now is just a result of Mon Mothma's demilitarization policy that they talk about in The Princess and the Scoundrel. They talk about it in The Last Shot. And they talk about it in Bloodline, and it's the reason that the Resistance existed in the sequels. The New Republic Navy was basically nothing. And so I think that this book just continues to show us how the New Republic throughout its entire time was basically an inept government.
Right, bogged down by bureaucracy and ineptness.
Right.
And
that's all over the Leia Bloodline book, and also a book that we have done a show on. We're big fans of doing after Return of the Jedi books, book reviews. Apparently, that's probably because that's my favorite era. But we it's
so fresh, it's so new.
We continue, and we get to see. We finally get to encounter our villains, and we get to encounter Luke Skywalker. So in the next couple chapters, we head to Luke Skywalker's Jedi Temple on Ossus. I believe this is the first confirmation that was Ossus. I could be wrong. I know it wasn't confirmed in the Book of Boba Fett. And so unless it was confirmed in an outside interview, I think this is the first time they've put down in writing that Luke's Jedi Temple is founded on Ossus. And we get to see Luke interacting with our good friend and character from The Force Awakens. He dies in the first 3 minutes of the movie, Lor San Tekka.
Lor San Tekka, yeah.
And
so, let me interject here. You said, hey, read this book, Shadows of the Sith. It's got, we didn't know anything. I didn't know anything. It's like, this is what we're reading. Okay, cool. And because, I'll read any Star Wars book. Some are better than others, but by the end of this one, you get to this chapter, you enter chapter 1. Oh my gosh, we get to find out what happens to Rey's parents. Next couple of chapters, yes, Luke Skywalker. We get to do some cool, and as this progresses, you'll see us talk about it. Some cool stuff happens with Luke Skywalker. This is another fill in the holes. He's not just sad sack on an island somewhere, and he's not perfect either. And which we're going to get into.
Right. It's very
but yes, a Luke Skywalker story.
It's very important
Lando.
for us to get these Luke Skywalker stories in this era, and they've been just slow dripping them for a long time. His cameos in The Mandalorian and the Book of Boba Fett, and his cameo in Battlefront 2, and this novel, and I think just the Kylo Ren comic book. Maybe all of the Luke information, and his very minimal role in Princess and the Scoundrel, very minimal role in Aftermath trilogy, and I don't even know if he's in the Alphabet Squadron trilogy at all. I mean, I'm sure he's mentioned, and he's only mentioned in Bloodline. So we have very little Luke knowledge during this time. We have really good Princess Leia knowledge during this time. We know exactly what she was doing. We have right after the war, and we have right before the Resistance. But we don't have much Luke knowledge. And so it's always awesome to get a Luke story. I love it. So we get to now see our two villains, Ochi of Bastoon and Kiza. Kiza and Ochi of Bastoon are both being manipulated by the Sith Eternal, and we know that means Palpatine. They're both being manipulated by Palpatine's clone. Ochi served him in his first life. Ochi was scarred when he traveled to Exegol, and he wants to travel back to Exegol to be healed, but he must complete his task first. And he's being basically put under duress / forced / he has to do this by Sith Eternal cultists who are visiting him. And so this is a huge blow my mind moment where I didn't realize that the Sith Eternal were out in the galaxy. I didn't realize they were doing these covert ops out in the galaxy this whole time. So I think that's a super new fertile ground for stories. And then we have Kiza, who was a acolyte of the dark side and that's not that's not the correct name of their order. The correct name of their order is the Acolytes of the Beyond, which is a dark side order. She was a member of that in the Aftermath trilogy, and Luke freed one of her sisters in that order. But Kiza stayed bad. They collected a bunch of dark side artifacts, and one of these is also desperately trying to get to Exegol. An awesome villain, Viceroy Exum Panchard, I believe. Yeah, and he's first introduced as this just a mask that's just talking to her, calling out to her, and we later learn more and more of his backstory, which is very interesting.
Yeah, and so these two characters, not to make any excuses for their actions or behavior, but they're both kind of tragic in a sense of how tortured and put upon they are by the Sith and Emperor Palpatine. Ochi basically had his face ripped off on Exegol, and he was just just a traitor. He was somebody basically conscripted. You know how the Empire does into delivering things to Exegol with Darth Vader, and so he looked at some stuff he wasn't supposed to and got scarred for it, and then Kiza's being controlled by this mask. And her story is really good, how it ends up. I liked hers a lot. And she flies around in a TIE Defender.
Yes, which is really cool. She's a great character. She's super interesting. Ochi is too. We get to deeply explore his character, but she is a very interesting new character that they fleshed out from the Aftermath books that was awesome. And one of the things they mention in the book, and I love how they mention it. When they start learning more about the mask and how it's possessed, Lando is the one to give us... You'd think Luke, being the Jedi, would be the one to give us the Sith backstory knowledge, but Lando's the one who goes, oh, do you mean like Momin? Because as readers of the Darth Vader 2017 comic books know, and as readers of the Fortress Vader comics know, and as readers of the Lando limited miniseries know, Darth Momin was also a Sith that was captured in a mask that could possess people when they put it on. And so I'm happy that the author and Lucasfilm and Del Rey are acknowledging this mask connection here, that they're putting it in the book, and they're doing it in a really organic canon way, since Lando has already encountered this artifact before.
Yeah, really cool connections. So many cool things going on.
Yeah, absolutely. So,
and
go ahead.
Another thing that is we get to fill a lot of gaps on, and probably one of the more pivotal important things, is the Sith dagger that is gifted to Ochi of Bestoon to help him fulfill his task. And we see it in the movies as the way Rey finds the secret chamber on the crashed Death Star to help her find the Wayfinder. And this artifact is really dangerous. It's really powerful, and it's crazy what this thing does in this book.
Yes, it absolutely is. It's very, very interesting. All of what we've gotten to see in this book so far. And so, after we get to be introduced to our villains, we got introduced to Luke on Ossus, we got introduced to Rey's family, the last character that we have to get introduced to is Lando. And I have this in my notes from this book. From the very first lines out of his mouth, I'm just super comfortable with Lando Calrissian. So, Lando grows a lot as a character. I think he grows more in canon than he does in Legends as a character, but he grows a lot as a character. But he's still always gotten his Lando swagger and charisma and charm. And I wrote down, I think Adam Christopher did a great job writing this book. But my question is Lando an easy character to write? Because I just feel like every time someone touches him in Star Wars, they knock him out of the park. I'm just not usually upset with a Lando interpretation. And so
no, you're exactly
I think
right.
people do a great job.
I'm not some literary scholar or anything like this, but he sounds like the straight man. He's always got a very moralistic, positive compass. It's easy for him to make the right decision. I mean, yeah, he's described as a scoundrel, but what does he do? Gamble and take bad people for their money? You know, he's a smuggler, but it always turns out he's helping out some wayward person somehow. So his heart's always in the right place. He's always looking to do the right thing, and it's and this book is no different, you know.
Yes, no, you're absolutely right. It is no different, and he's such a cool character. Lando and Luke are my two favorite characters in Star Wars. And so this book was just from the minute that it was announced that it was just going to be a them story. I really, in The Rise of Skywalker, got excited when Lando says he was on an adventure with Luke to do that, because they don't interact that much. They have a deep friendship, but they're polar opposite characters. You know, Lando is a materialistic guy. He's a gambler. He has swagger. He likes the finer things in life. And Luke is a minimalist Jedi. I mean, he lives in a rock hut, and he's a monk. And so, but they're great foils for each other, and they're just great characters together. And so, I'm really happy when I get to see this relationship in these pages, and it's very, very cool. And so we see Lando, who's been searching for his missing daughter for the past 6 years. He's scouring the galaxy looking for his lost daughter, who we know through source books, and I'm not sure where else, but it's been mentioned other places, was stolen from him by the First Order, and she was trained as a stormtrooper for the First Order. And so Lando has been obsessed with finding her. And so this is, obviously starts out with a very sad story. But Lando already crosses paths with Ochi as soon as he gets on this Boxer Point station, where he hears Ochi bragging about this mission that he's received from the Sith cultists. He doesn't use the word Sith, but Lando's able to piece together that it's the same people who stole his daughter.
Yeah. And Ochi's a drunken fool. He's a psychopath. And he recruits some friends there or something, doesn't he? And he's really a butthead to those guys. And they're just like, whatever. We're getting paid. Mercenaries pretty much. And Ochi's just scamming them. Ochi's the worst.
Ochi is the worst. He's got a good character arc. He's a good character to hate, but there's just no likable qualities about the guy. There's nothing that you never... Kisa, you feel bad for her. you never feel bad for Ochi. You're never rooting for Ochi. You're just like, man, this guy kind of sucks.
Right. In a major way, he deserves what he gets. Like his face ripped off, and the trials he faces in the book.
Yes, you're absolutely right. He is such an interesting character, though, and he's really fun to follow. So they run into another Lando overhears this conversation, and here's the big quest. This is after Luke has been told by Lor Santeca that he needs to go to an archaeological dig, which is how we see all the plot lines start to get intertwined with each other. So we then get a really, really important flashback to Exegol, where we see how Dathan, Darth Sidious's clone son, escapes. And it says that the Emperor didn't kill him because he thought that maybe he would have some use someday. And so he calls him an abomination. The acolytes don't acknowledge him or anything like that. But we know that Palpatine has machinations about him. Go ahead, Colin.
Right, yeah. So Dathan is a strand cast. And you can say your piece on this just a minute. There's a lot to this. And so we know from reading other source materials, you're more knowledgeable in the names of, but Palpatine is an imperfect clone. I think we've already talked about this on a different podcast too. You know, he's restricted to the planet, and there's other strand casts like Supreme Leader Snoke out there, and Dathan, who Abomination, it has no midi-chlorians. They don't even mention midi-chlorians, but it's kind of obvious. You can read between the lines, and he's not Palpatine. Palpatine's trying to make himself again into another body that can walk and be free and go about the galaxy and do what they want. And and Dathan isn't that. And so instead of just being discarded like Spartan style or something, you can see the machinations of Palpatine here, that something else is going to go on. Like they didn't watch him. They wanted him to be this outcast so that he could do his own thing. Is that what you get from it? Is that your feeling?
Yes, yeah. So in this book, this is a really interesting perspective thing that Star Wars did. Because in this book, it describes Dathan's escape from his perspective. That he escaped on a ship that was leaving, and that he was headed out, and that he did not have to, that he was able to escape without anyone's knowledge, basically, is what we're told by this book. And it's because it's told from Dathan's perspective. But I believe that there's...
Yeah, it'd be like...
Go ahead.
Like this bag of trash I set down is missing. Nobody's going to care.
Exactly.
You know?
But I believe that there is another piece of canon media that has established that Palpatine allowed him to escape so that he could go about the galaxy and try to procreate and try to have a child that could sire Palpatine's legacy, that could continue to move him on. And I can't remember.
Right.
Here we go. I found the quote. Palpatine says, "I rejected this useless creature, but I chose to let it live. Even if this son was undeserving of my legacy, I surmised that the Palpatine blood rushing through its veins might someday become useful." And that's from Secrets of the Sith. So I'm not sure where I thought about him willingly letting him escape. Maybe I imagined that. Anyways.
This is Shadows of the Sith. Secrets of the Sith is a different book.
Oh, that's true. Yes, that is true. You're right. My mistake. This is from The Secrets of the Sith. So this was from a different book that implies that Palpatine allowed him to escape. So it's really interesting that we have this dueling narrative perspective right here between the two pieces of media that are not contradictory, but it's just their two perspectives, and which continues to show Palpatine's dark machinations all the time. That he's always thinking 3 steps ahead.
All the time. Right. 30 steps ahead. More.
Yeah. And so, after we get this really important part of Exegol lore from Dathan, we see Lando on his luxury yacht. He talks to Shriv, a character from Battlefront 2, and from some other media that's just a good old rebel pilot. He's a good guy to throw in there when they need a friend for the main characters, and is a rebel pilot. So Lando starts getting some information about what he heard Ochi talk about. And while this is going on, Luke is at the archaeological dig, and they discover a Sith holocron in the dirt and red lightsaber shards. I mean, obviously, how crazy is that? We're getting something like that Luke is discovering these dark artifacts right now. I mean, that's just all the Force lore that you could ever want is in this book.
Yeah, so two things I want to say. Lando is him and Nien Nunb blew up Death Star 2. And 16 years later, he calls up his Republic friends, and they will barely give him the time of day. I think we've had discussions on this before, but you would think if Lando Calrissian or Luke Skywalker or Han Solo called you up, you drop what you're doing. Yes, sir. Yes, ma'am. Lay out the red carpet. Nope. Not now. Not in this universe. Not for these guys. They're just like another person. I mean, and Lando has to beg to get the information on the couple who was sent on their way. It's it's another bureaucratic nightmare that the Republic's become. And then another hole that's filled is, so how did these kyber crystal shards get there? They're part of the Sith Wayfinder, we find out later. But there's only two. This one's smashed, yada, yada. And so this is another far-reaching machinations of the Emperor, because this guy, an archaeologist, interacts with these kyber shards, and he becomes possessed. Right? Didn't this happen in the book?
No, you're absolutely right. He interacts with these kyber shards.
He becomes possessed. Yeah, and is doing bad things. They catch him before anything really bad happens, I think. But yeah, and so it's like you touch these bad things, bad kyber shards, and Palpatine's going to reach out and get
right,
you.
Exactly.
You know, it's really hard. And so this fills in the hole from the movies of how did Kylo Ren get influenced? And this is how. It's not, Kylo Ren didn't touch a shard. He was tapped into some negative energies, obviously, dark side of the Force. But this is apparent in this book that wasn't as apparent in the movies.
That Palpatine is such a powerful Sith that he has just these dark tendrils that stretch across the galaxy through the Force. And this is further explored in the 2020 Vader comic, which, again, I encourage people to pick up. It's just as good as the other two Darth Vader comics were. And in the 2020 Darth Vader comic, they talk about how there is a mountain of kyber underneath the Sith Temple on Exegol, and that they are constantly making it bleed to channel dark side energy. And it's a mountain of kyber. So it's obviously, it's not Ilum, but it's a lot of kyber. And so this is another perspective of it's one giant kyber shard. And so these little shards are attached to it, and they're a piece of it. And these kyber shards continue to be important throughout the story. And that's another thing that I think canon has done that Legends didn't do, is it has put huge emphasis and given a giant new meaning to kyber shards that, used to be lightsaber crystals and used to be a couple different things that they've combined into this one ultra-powerful MacGuffin that I think is for the better of the story. I think it's a great tool that they've created for themselves.
Yeah, that we got to see a glimpse of in Andor with the kyber necklace.
Yes, and in Rogue One with Jyn's kyber necklace.
Yeah, very cool.
So, next we get to see a really cool flashback for Ochi, where he is flashbacked to the Clone Wars, where he is still being a Jedi hunter for Sidious, and he's hunting Kanan's master, Depa Billaba, but he's stopped by Mace Windu. And this is when Depa Billaba was a Padawan under Mace Windu. And it's a super, super cool piece of lore that we get to see Ochi, that we know that Ochi has been serving the Emperor for that long. He's been serving him since the Clone War, before he was the Emperor, when he was just Darth Sidious.
Yeah, and it makes me wonder, because Ochi's a braggadocio. He likes to tout how he's killed so many Jedi and all this stuff. It makes me wonder if he's an unreliable narrator in a sense, like We don't see people do this, except for really rare occasions. They're either smoked by tons of clones or killed by other Jedi. It's not some casual person who can go do anything it's just not ultra rare, rarest of rare, 1% of 1% of 1%. And Ochi doesn't strike me as the person who's capable of doing that.
Well, he held his own against Luke for a little while, but I absolutely see what you're saying. This chapter does include one of my bigger complaints about the book, and it's that other than the core characters that we've mentioned, Luke, Lando, Miramir, Kiza, Komat, Ochi, and Dathan, and Rey, that I basically can't remember another person's name in this book. Like, all of Ochi's kind of cronies that he has, that they carry throughout the book. He starts with a crew of like 6 guys, and it ends up just being 2 of them. But I never figured out these guys' names. I never figured out what species they are. It's just like they are just random silhouetted black thugs. Same for the corporate sector authorities. Same for the guys at the kind of like extravagant space palace. I can't remember that guy's name, but there's a lot of sections in the book where I think there's just a bunch of not memorable characters that are just pushing the story along. And that's not always super common in Star Wars novels. Sometimes they really do make you care about, the NPCs, for lack of a better term. But this novel certainly did not. But it had a lot going on in the plot for the other characters that makes it more difficult to do that.
Well, and 2 things on that. And later on we're going to discuss, there's a whole throwaway faction that's just droid pirates. And they're just bad guys, cookie cutter bad guys who are capable of doing really horrible things, but you don't feel bad when stuff happens to them. They're just really throwaway. And then the mining planet, Anaximander, he dies. He's just throwaway. The person they meet on the polluted planet, that we'll get to later, she's just a throwaway, kind of. All these other characters, in Rise of Skywalker, when Finn meets the free troopers, you care about them at the end, and you wonder what's happened next. Anaximander, okay,
right.
The girl on the polluted planet, I should know her. I don't know her name. I feel sorry for her.
I think she was a memorable enough character to remember because she's also mentioned in the Aftermath books. But again, it just reinforced the point is that this doesn't have as memorable characters. But that's also one of the reasons is the nature of the story. In Star Wars canon, for years now, we have been getting character study books. We've been getting Tarkin and Phasma and Thrawn and all these books that are just, all these books that are just characters' names. Like the Disney Plus series, we get Boba Fett, we get The Mandalorian, we get Obi-Wan Kenobi, we get Andor, we get Ahsoka. Star Wars is obsessed right now with naming things after characters and just giving them a character study. There's a Princess Leia graphic novel, a Han Solo graphic novel, a Chewbacca graphic novel, 2 Lando graphic novels. There's an Obi-Wan Kenobi, a Yoda, an Obi-Wan and Anakin. It's just a lot of character study. And so all of these character study books are really good at making you care about all the characters that the main character interacts with because you're telling one linear story, one guy's perspective. You're not jumping around. You're just telling that story. And so Star Wars has done a really good job of fleshing out side characters for the past few years because of these stories that they're telling. That's not the case in this book, but that's because this book is telling a much grander story about multiple characters. This book's much more like a movie. The Tarkin book is wonderful. The Thrawn book is wonderful. These books are great. These stories are great. The comic books are good. The Han Solo comic book is one of the best comics that Star Wars has published. But most of them are not movies. Most of them are not something you could put on the screen. But this book is something you could put on the screen. The story is expansive enough that if this was a whole TV show, I would have watched it. If they would have made a Shadow of the Sith TV show, and this was the plot, one for one, beat for beat, I think it would have made a fine television show, and you can't always say that about these Star Wars products.
Yeah. Yep. Especially seeing Kiza, all the mystery behind her character. They'd string us on in that TV show like that. We'd be glued to our seats.
Absolutely. So, the next bit of information that we get, and this little last bit for the Ochi chapter that we're talking about, is we finally see D.O., cone-shaped droid from The Rise of Skywalker, so he's cool. That's interesting. I would like to see... I like BB-8 being Poe's droid. I want that to stay the same. I'm glad BB-8 and Rey have a relationship, but, you know, R2 is Luke's, and 3PO is Leia's, and BB-8 is Poe's. I hope that in subsequent sequel material, D.O. becomes Rey's droid. Like, I would like to see that happen. I think this book made me want that even more, because I got to see how much Ochi mistreated that little guy.
Right. Yeah, he's an endearing character in this, too.
So, next we see Luke travel to the planet Tython, which is where we see Grogu and Mando go in Mando Season 2. And so, Luke is going to Force Hinge, which is a former Jedi temple that was crushed and destroyed. So it's a ruined Jedi temple on Tython. And it's the exact same place that Grogu went to. So Luke goes to where Grogu went to sit on the Seeing Stone, and he looks into the Sith Wayfinder and the shards. And it gives us one of the most important moments in canon. It gives us one of the most important moments in Legends. Like, this is done for the first time really well. I don't even remember how it happened in Legends. I think it was done well there too. But this is done for the first time in a superb way in Star Wars canon. Yeah, and Luke is transported to Exegol on the Seeing Stone. He begins a battle against Darkside Wraiths, and he is encountered by his father's Force Ghost, Anakin Skywalker, who is able to drive these Sith Wraiths away. They're basically, I was imagining a Lord of the Rings Wraiths when I was reading this, and Anakin is able to come back as a Force Ghost and prevent this. And look, Luke got to see Anakin in Return of the Jedi, but this is the first time where they interact with explicit dialogue. And this was even part of the advertising for this book. And I still was pumping my fist in the air reading this.
Yeah. So I listened to this in audiobook, and I had no idea this was coming. Like I said, I dove in head first in this thing. And this scene came about, I about cried. I was so overwhelmed of this occurring in this book. And I'm like, oh my gosh. And I didn't spoil anything for you. I called you up after this occurred, after I read this part, quote unquote, listened to this part. I'm like, you got to read this. You got to read this. We got to talk about this, because of this right here. It was so cool.
It was. I mean, it's absolutely cool. And look, Luke is a really, really big treat in this book because he is powerful. This is, as far as I'm concerned, Luke is peak in canon so far. And it's just awesome to get him. He was getting fought by all of these Sith Wraiths, and there's multiple. I don't know how many there are. I imagine, 6, 7, 8, 9. Oh, it says 9. 9 Wraiths. And it talks about in the book how Luke can hold them off as long as he's physically capable of. They're not going to penetrate his defense, but eventually he's going to tire. And he can't kill these things. But it just shows how powerful Luke is, that he's able to make this circle of defense around himself for what, probably could have been days. And it's just super cool to get us for us to get to see such a powerful Luke Skywalker back again. It's a real treat.
Yeah.
So,
good point.
Right after that, Luke is, taken back from Exegol. He's back on Tython. And Lando comes there, and this is where the stories merge together. Lando tells Luke about Ochi and the Sith assassin. Luke is having all this weird Sith stuff happen to him. He doesn't know it's connected to Kiza. And so he's like, all right, let's go. Let's figure out what Ochi of Bastoon is after and who he's kidnapping. He wants to help Lando figure out what happened to his daughter. And then he tells Lando about Exegol. We learn a little bit more about the Sith Wayfinders, and they go out on their adventure, where they go to talk to the New Republic, and they're again just blocked by bureaucracy.
Yeah, let me interject one thing here. Who isn't with Luke at this point that should be?
Kylo Ren, I think is what I think.
Ben
you and I might have
Solo.
talked about this.
Ben
I think you're
Solo.
going to say Kylo Ren, and I disagree.
Yeah, well, Ben Solo.
Oh, Ben Solo. Yes,
Ben Solo's
sorry,
his
he's
Padawan.
not Kylo Ren yet. My mistake.
Yeah, not Kylo Ren. So if you ask me, and we'll get into this later, at the closing scenes of the book, there was a small snippet of it in this one when Luke is going off to the archaeological dig site, and he's like, "Oh, you gotta watch everybody here," you know. And to me, this is a mistake, not of writing, it's a poor judgment on Luke here, because, and what led to part of Ben Solo's downfall was because, like, he's supposed to be Luke's Padawan. That's why they have this master Padawan relationship, the Jedi do, so that they can cement this bond. And how much not better, or how much different would the, and I'm not making an argument that they should have done anything different, literally. I'm talking about going a deep dive into these characters' heads. You know, if Ben Solo was by Luke's side during confrontations here that we're fixing to get into, the outcomes might have been better or more positive, and would have cemented the relationship between these two to more of an unbreakable bond that a Jedi Master and a Jedi Padawan would have, as opposed to just something that's just thinly veiled, breaks at the drop of a hat, which hopefully we get more from Disney later.
Yeah, well, I do agree with that. I do agree that it shows Luke's flaws at this point. I think we've explored that. We don't have a whole lot of Ben Solo interaction in the book, but the very limited chapters we do, I think that they are very good and subtle about showing where Luke might have failed Kylo. And I definitely think part of it is right here. And obviously from a out of canon perspective, but they're forced into this by canon, is, you know, Ben Solo probably couldn't have been on this adventure because of all of the interaction with dark side artifacts and things like that. And you would think that Ben would have a different understanding, and Luke would understand the danger more that they were in when Ben fell to the dark side. So I understand why he's not a part of it. But I think you make a great point that they are using this to show where Luke begins to slip up. Like how in the last shot, we got to begin to see how Han kind of slipped up as a dad around Ben Solo. Right. So they go down to the Adelphi system, and this is Luke and Lando, and they are just blocked at every turn by the New Republic bureaucracy. Lando has to convince Shriv to tell them that one of the pilots had a contact, and it's Zargo Anaximander, on his night side space station, and that's where they sent the family. So Luke and Lando are sent on this quest to go find kind of a scum and villainy guy in Zargo Anaximander. He's really, Zargo is Lando if he was more corrupt. He's the anti-Lando. He's a corrupt Lando. He's the Cloud City administrator, and he's corrupt. And that's who he is. And he's a simple character. I don't think he's relatively deep, but he is an important character, and he's a good character to read about. He's an entertaining character, but he's not. His motivations are clear. He's out for himself, just like Lando was until he joined the Rebel Alliance. And so Zargo is what happens to Lando if he doesn't join the Rebel Alliance, basically. I think is what the author is not so subtly telling us.
Yeah, and the depiction of his space station night side, it's a meteorite or something along those lines that exists in the rings of a gas giant. And so they have this virtually unlimited supply of resources to draw from. And so he's very rich and very opulent in his ways and means. It's cool it's fascinating to read about and how he does things.
Yes.
Because all these people who live on this station work for him. or are buying things or delivering things to him. You know, it's not like a town, you go to their multiple businesses. Nope. You show up on his space station and you do business with him or his compatriots.
You're right. So we get to see a lot from Zargo's perspective, his interactions with Dathan and Miramir, and how they think that he's going to help them, and he pretends to, and then they figured out they've been locked in his room. And Zargo goes, he has them bioscanned, and he finds out that Dathan is a strand cast, and so he knows that they match the bounty that Ochi put out there, and so he contacts Ochi and says, "I've got your people." I mean, it's a classic Star Wars thing, is, reporting the bounty. Like, "Oh, your bounty's right here." Bounty hunters are such an integral part of this. There's not specifically these guys aren't bounty hunters, Zargo or Ochi, but just the concept of, that you think you have a safe haven and you don't, happens all the time in Star Wars. And so it's just a very familiar way to keep the plot moving along for us. So I don't know if we need to touch too much on this one unless you have something to say.
No, so a couple things. Anaximander sends out this thing, "Hey, your people are here," and thinking that Ochi's just going to come pick them up, kind of like you'd pick up your friend at the store who needs a ride. Nope. Ochi sends the droid army, the droid pirates, and they mess the whole planet
yes,
up.
I was going to get to that. I was going to get to that part before the raid.
Yeah, go ahead. Yeah, and then it's a disaster. Go ahead.
So we have Luke and Lando get there just a little before the droids. They're aboard the ship. They're looking around. They're trying to figure it out, and they understand that Animaxer and that Zargo. I'm just going to call him Zargo from now on. That Zargo is holding the family against their will, and so Lando is trying to find them, and they need to go reach the family. But before they can do that, the droid crush pirates of Bestoon jump in and try to stop them, and that's who you're talking about. And they are wreaking havoc, and these droids are just tearing it up, and it's like obviously just a whole contingent of pirates that are droids. It's a neat Star Wars-y concept. And I think of something when I read the Droid Crush Pirates of Bestoon, and there's a running joke through this book that's pretty funny, is Bestoon is never identified as a planet in this book. Like, you Ochi of Bestoon, and we don't really know what Bestoon means. And people are making fun of that. And it's kind of a funny running joke through the book. And so these droids are the pirates of Bestoon. And so they're at Ochi's behest. And Bestoon is a planet, and we know that from other media. But from this book, they don't really touch that information. And so people in the book make fun of Ochi for his name. And it's a funny little tidbit, I think.
Yeah, and these droids, they're ruthless. It's a really dark aspect of this thing because they'll blow you up as soon as they look at you. And they don't care. They have no qualms, no morals, as droids should, I guess. But we don't see many droids of this nature in some other books. I guess you got HK droids and a couple other things, but they're bad.
They absolutely are. You're right. I think that they are. They're interesting. So they get into this big fight. Lando's fighting the droids. Luke now senses Kiza, so he has to run, and he engages her outside on her modified TIE Defender. She's wielding a lightsaber, and Luke is able to identify this lightsaber as the lightsaber of Darth Noctis, a former Sith. And this lightsaber is like a fishing hook. It's not that much of a dramatic curve, but it's more than a scimitar, and it's more than a machete. It's a dramatically curved blade. And so it's a really interesting and thought-evoking way to think about this lightsaber. In canon, we don't have a whole lot of lightsaber shapes established. We got double-bladed, we got single-bladed, we got the crossguard, and I think this is the newest addition in that we have this curved blade lightsaber with a dramatic curve. It's very cool.
Yeah, and the fights here, all the characters converge here on that side, and it's a big clash. It's a fun interaction between everybody. Also, Ochi kills Zargo and Anaximander. The first kill with the artifact Sith dagger.
Yes, and this is where Ochi is just taken
drinks
over
his
by the
blood. Yeah, the dagger drinks his blood. It's very dark.
The dagger sips his blood. It goes and seeps into the dagger. The dagger is pretty much alive, like many Force artifacts are. And so we see this interaction. We see Ochi kill him, and Ochi is just filled with this hate and rage and bloodlust that this dagger is forcing him to feel, as all these dark side artifacts possess their hosts, just like that's the huge theme of the mask that Kiza's wearing. So in Luke and her's fight, they get into it, and it's not an even fight, and Luke doesn't want to have to kill her, but he will, and then she's conveniently saved by not debris or anything like that, but debris and Luke's need to use the Force, and she gets away. And that's a really interesting fight because Luke is thrown off. He is able to identify where this lightsaber is from, and he is concerned because in his fledgling Jedi Order galaxy, there's another emerging dark side threat, and it's not the Emperor as far as Luke knows. And so this becomes a problem. And Kiza comes demanding that he give her the shards of kyber crystal that he found on Yoturba. Star Wars is just filled with these difficult planet names for me tonight.
It wouldn't be Star Wars if it wouldn't.
Right. And so that fight's really important for Luke's understanding of the threat that he's facing in this story. And finally, Lando is able to help the family, who he never sees, whom he never meets. He only talks to him through comlink. He is able to help the family escape on this ship out of there, on Zargo's ship. He takes the Goldstone, and they are able to flee in an exciting chase.
Oh, yeah, Goldstone. Oh, sorry. Yeah, and R2-D2 is in it, too. He cuts the restraints.
Yes, yeah, it's R2 and Lando team up, which this is a good R2 book. We have a lot of good introduction to R2 in this book, and so that's been awesome. Just any time we get to see him, and he's well written in this book as well, which I think that would be a difficult character to write because he doesn't even talk. But I think people do a very good job of writing R2-D2 sometimes, and I think Adam Christopher did as well. So we now have the family still on the run. They're being chased by Ochi, and they head to another planet where another chase ensues. Luke and Lando on speeders are chasing these not bounty hunters but mercenaries that Ochi has hired to try and track down the family, and it's just this exciting speeder chase, and it talks about how nice these speeders Lando are, and it's a neat scene. It's a good read, and it's a quick, exciting chase scene.
Yeah, and where are they at? Bosticor or
Tyranitir Minor.
Okay.
Yes.
Where's the polluted planet?
Oh, they haven't even gotten close to that yet. There's so much going on in this book.
Okay.
Is the thing is it is all over the place. And so they pursue the family. The family gets away again. Luke and Lando don't make it. All the bounty hunters are defeated. And now Luke and Lando are kind of at a loss. They don't know what they're going to do. The family has ditched their ship. They've stolen another ship. No one knows how to track them. No one knows how to get them. Ochi's lost them. Everybody's lost them. And so they are gone. And now the family is concerned. They know they're going to get found eventually, and they need to figure out how to get a hold of the Jedi that was going to help them. And that's what they are concerned about, is that they couldn't trust anyone in the galaxy at all. They were not able to, but now they can trust somebody, and it's Jedi, and they believe in the help that the Jedi can give them if they can only find him. And they are very, very stressed about trying to find Luke and Lando.
Yeah, and this is stressful in the whole book for the reader too, because you're like, they were right there.
Right.
Oh,
no,
man.
you're totally right. And so Luke tells Lando that he might have a way to figure out how to get a hold of the family, how to find them. And he takes Lando to a planet that has been ravaged by radioactivity, a super cool concept for a planet, where a former acolyte of the Beyond, the same order that Kiza is currently a part of, where a former acolyte is living, and Luke needs her help when she has special technology that can track ships through hyperspace.
Yeah, and so this is where the hyperspace tracking from the movies comes from. It's very cool.
Well, no. Actually, I don't believe that's true. I think that there are two separate hyperspace tracking technologies here.
You think so?
Because this is, I could be wrong. I'm not 100% positive on this, but I'm pretty sure that the technology used by the First Order is different than the one described in this book. I can't remember what the First Order does, but in this book, you track a ship's drive signature based on a bunch of different factors and like radiation that it emits. And I don't believe that's how you track it in the Last Jedi, but I could be wrong. I'm not quite sure. That needs to be. We should research that further.
Yeah, I thought this was always a leap to how the First Order got to it. Like they had figured it out somehow based on this or something. Who knows?
Yeah. Again, I'm not sure, but that could be the case. But anyway, to keep moving on a little bit, you talked about Ochi getting to Bastakor and getting a hold of the Corporate Sector Authority. And so Ochi goes to this Corporate Sector Authority place, which they're basically a puppet of the First Order, which is a puppet of the Sith Eternal, which is a puppet of Palpatine. But they're basically a puppet of the First Order, and they are here to help Ochi. And they're here to help Ochi in whatever way he chooses, and this is really, really hard on the CSA guys.
Yeah, they're flabbergasted. He takes the leader, the colonel or whoever it was, he takes his flask. Or actually, the leader offers his flask. Hey, have a drink. And Ochi just keeps it.
Right.
That's how you know Ochi's a bad guy. He does it. And it's supposedly filled with some super expensive spirit, too, that you just can't go casually buy.
Yeah, you're absolutely right.
I thought it was a cool little tidbit.
You are absolutely right. And no, you are correct that this was the same hyperspace tracking technology that the First Order was using. For some reason, I didn't think that was the case. I'm sorry. But yeah, you were right. It is the same tracking technology.
And so that's another thing we need to fill in sometime. How does it get into the First Order's hands? You know, maybe, what's her name, gives it up or goes back to the dark side. Or gets
no. It's not the same.
You know?
I'm sorry. I take that back. I'm sorry. I read deeper into the article. What it says is that because I now remember, the hyperspace tracking that Comat uses relies on a network of Imperial beacons across the galaxy, but they're all shutting down, and it's getting worse. And so that was the explanation for why Comat's ability was not going to last, was not going to be able to be something that you could continually do. But so the First Order has a completely different. They have like a field generator, and it's been explained. I have no idea where. I don't know where they got it. I don't even want to know right now. But they've had it explained a little bit. The next thing that happens, you know, Ochi interacts with the CSA guys. He commissions all these troops. We get to see a little bit of Dathan and Miramir's past together, and what they kind of had together back on Miramir's planet, how they fell in love, how Dathan is able to find love. And after this heart-wrenching flashback where you get to see this love for Palpatine's tortured son, is that they're going to leave Rey. They're going to give her away. They're going to give her to Unkar Plutt. They're going to hide her until they can find Lando and Luke. But we know that is not the case. That is not what happens. Because
that's such a sad deal. I can't imagine how they felt. I mean, I guess you can, but you know, I have my own kids, and I'd want to find a different way. I don't want to exhaust. I guess they did though.
No, I mean,
holding out hope for the Jedi.
You're absolutely right. You're absolutely right. It's a heart-wrenching thing. The way that they describe it, the way that it's just going to have to happen, and so they plan to take her to Jakku, to Unkar Plutt, leave her there. They give him a deposit. While they can find Luke and Lando. And so they're planning this, and they're trying to get to Jakku. So while this is happening, we really take kind of a long break from Miramir and Dathan's story, because we go to Luke and Lando. They find Comat on this radioactive planet. It's ravaged by radioactivity. We learn a lot about Comat's backstory and a lot about just what this planet is and all the connections to Aftermath that if you're a canon junkie, you're going to really see and really appreciate. And then we see that Luke and Lando and Comat are all attacked by droids on this planet. They're attacked by droids that have kyber crystals embedded in them that are able to detect the kyber crystals that Luke has, because they're all cut from the same giant mountain on Exegol.
Right. Yeah, that's such a fascinating concept. And Kiza makes these droids, and it's kind of in a ritualistic way. That was really interesting.
Yes, it was. It was very interesting. And so we get to see We get to see this droid fight. We also get to hear Kiza explain the legend of XM Panshard, which is just this chilling. I mean, Omen. So you have to continue to draw these parallels. If you read the Momin backstory in the Darth Vader 2017 comics, you're like, this is grotesque. This is messed up. Momin was a messed up guy. He's like a sociopath, but he's an artist. He has a totally different backstory than XM Panshard that is just this genocidal maniac. He's like Vlad the Impaler in Star Wars, and he's possessed this mask. And so we get to hear about this just chilling Sith backstory. About the mask, told from Comat's perspective, and it's really, really interesting.
Yeah, that mask and the depiction of it in the book is chilling too. It has rivets on it, doesn't have a mouth, obsidian eyes, I think. It whispers to people in their heads. It's very spooky, very scary.
Yeah, it's an interesting artifact for sure. So, we then see Comat say she can figure out how to hyperwave track the family. They can't let the family get captured. They can't let Ochi get to Exegol. They can't let Kiza get to Exegol. So, Lando and Luke tell Comat they need her to figure out how to track. They defeat the droids. They figure out how to track. And so now they're doing the split up. They're doing the big split up here. Lando and Comat are going to go to Ta Pravod to try and help the Goldstone and the family escape Ochi and his thugs. There's an interesting fight here, but it's the highlight fight. This is actually this feels like a secondary plot line for a minute. You get to see them fight Ochi and his thugs off successfully, and the family successfully escapes. And that's really just, that's an important part of the story. Lando and Comat get a win right there. They're actually titular because the family's jumping to Jakku. And so Luke and R2 are able to track Kiza to an asteroid on the edge of the Red Honeycomb Zone, which is the zone that protects Exegol from the rest of the galaxy, and the rest of the galaxy from Exegol, for that matter. It's the red twisting nebula that Kylo flies through, and that everybody has to fly through. And so they find Kiza crashed on an asteroid surrounding this zone. And I think that's a super cool concept, because they explain that she was trying to get to Exegol and crashed there. And it's really, really neat. I am a huge fan that Kiza was so trying to desperately get there, and she fell short, and now she's trying again. And she needs those shards to get there.
Yeah, and is this the final confrontation between Kiza and Luke right here on this asteroid?
This is basically the final confrontation. This is the second to last confrontation, but this is the ultimate confrontation. This is the penultimate confrontation, but it's the most important. Well, we can explain in just a moment.
From the Jedi side.
But
yeah.
They get into an awesome lightsaber battle. I mean, it's great. It's really well written. We get to hear how they engage in two lightsaber combat, how the mask is just screaming, and how there's a fire and the place is going to burn down, and you just really feel invested, and this is an important fight, and this is the ultimate light side dark side clash again, like it always is. It's super interesting. You've got these Sith artifacts animating this young girl who's not particularly force sensitive against this Jedi master, and Luke is just making short work of her, but he's trying to save her, because that's such an important part of Luke's character, is trying to save the lost. And it's super interesting to see them fight like this. But eventually Luke just has to see her crushed. She's stabbed through the heart. She is killed that way. And Luke knows she's damaged, she's done. And the mask is tossed into the furnace by one of the droids that is turned on after Kiza's death. After Skywalker leaves, they toss the mask into the furnace, all the metal burns off, and it reveals all of these kyber crystals that make up the mask. It's such a cool concept as the droid affixes the mask onto Kiza's face, and it possesses her corpse, which is just, God, what a cool concept.
And the droids rebuild her body. There's I've seen this. Superman 3 did this to some characters, not rebuilding a corpse or anything, but a technological possession of a meat puppet kind of thing. Is very scary, especially in Star Wars.
Yeah, no, absolutely.
We saw it in that other book where the guy was attached. He made himself into a droid.
Right, that was
what
Last
was
Shot.
called?
That was Last Shot.
Been too long.
Where yes,
Last
and
Shot.
so it was
Lots of parallels.
grafting
here.
droid parts onto people is a long concept here for Star Wars. And so Luke, believing her dead, returns to Ta Bravo to find Luke and Comat, and he needs to go get them. And Ochi has captured Lando and Comat, and he begins to interrogate them about the family's whereabouts. It gets pretty tense there for a minute. Lando has that Sith dagger burning his neck, but Luke shows up, easily dispatches them. He gets into it with Ochi for just a second, and then Ochi's able to create a distraction and escape in the corporate sector authorities transport. And so then Luke and Comat and Lando kind of confer, and they're like, the family got away. We have no idea how to find them. Luckily, neither does Ochi. He has no idea where they went. But while they're talking, Kiza returns. Luke is stunned, and then they figure out it's just her possessed dead body, which is so dark and so demented for it to be happening right now. This is what I meant by the last battle, is Luke is just fighting her dead husk being controlled by this mask.
Yeah, so how hard would this be to come across an animated corpse with
I know
parts on it
it's
and
disgusting.
just pan shards?
It's disgusting.
Yeah.
It's a cool fight though. And so they fight. Luke finally possesses her. Right, this talks about again how powerful Luke is. He was almost about to be possessed by the mask himself, but is able to take his lightsaber and Darth Noctis's and slice the mask into quarters. Kiza's dead body is for sure dead, and now the mask has been defeated, and we have our first big bad destroyed. Now all we have to do is deal with Ochi.
Dathan and Miramir have, while this is all going on, have stolen Ochi's ship. From they dressed up a big high espionage thing, and they're going to go to Jakku and drop Rey off in Ochi's ship.
Right.
And correct me if I'm wrong, but they didn't disable the tracker, or he had something that they didn't know about easily, and that's how he found him eventually. But why couldn't they find him? Right,
Ochi had to go talk to the CSA guys, and the CSA guys were like, we put a tracker on your ship. And so that's how, and we can see.
Oh, it was on the outside.
We can see at this point Ochi beginning to kind of really slip. Like he's not likable at the beginning, but he's not that crazy at the beginning. Ochi started to lose it. He's kind of becoming a drunk. He's getting in this. He almost crashes his ship. He kills all those people. And that dagger is really messing with him. And so Ochi goes to Jakku, but already after Miramir and Dathan have given Rey to Unkar Plutt. They've left. They have beads from Pisana in their hands meant to mislead Ochi if they run into him. And then Ochi gets them, and they know their time has come. It's a short chapter. Ochi boards their ship, and then it's the scenes from The Rise of Skywalker. You see Dathan get stabbed by the dagger. Then we hear Miramir.
Ochi's wanting to know where the girl is.
Exactly. We see Miramir interact with him.
They obviously won't
and
tell
he kills her. And the dagger tastes more blood. And Ochi thanks the girls on Jakku, but then he finds these beads in her hand, and he knows, he sees that she's on Pisana. He can feel it. And then we see Ochi slip even farther into madness, where he kills both of his crew guys, and now it's just Ochi and his droid Dio on their way to Pisana on a wild goose hunt, because Ochi continuously falls into madness. And he keeps getting mad that he doesn't have enough booze.
Yep. Yeah. Descent into madness is a very
yes, it is.
Thing.
And so while...
Go ahead.
Go ahead.
Go ahead. I was going to say, and how he dies, he lands on Pisana and goes out to those sinking fields and just sinks, and that's it. Oh, what a fitting end, just out like a poof.
Well, even before
You know?
that, they have him drinking hyperspace coolant, and he's just losing his mind.
Oh, yeah, that's
He
right.
goes to, like you said, he goes to Pisana. He's talking about how he could never be fooled. He is brilliant.
Just talking
he's,
to himself.
he's just losing
yeah.
his mind because of this dagger. And so, like you said, he goes out on a speeder. He doesn't even notice that his speeder is messed up. It begins to drag, and then it slips into the sinking sands. And that's the end of Ochi of Bastoon. And like you said, it's a fitting end. Is this man driven to madness? He is just lost in the Pisana Desert, in the Forbidden Valley of Pisana. And it's just, that's the end of Ochi. And that's what we know, that we see his skeleton, we see his dagger in The Rise of Skywalker. And this character who was created for that movie and has gotten quite a bit of backstory at the end of, or in the Vader comics and in other pieces of media, he's finally taken care of by these sands and is just descent into madness, and how the Sith took him and tore him up and discarded him like a tool, like they always do.
Yeah, and it's even more fitting because he had for himself, he had such high hopes. He was so motivated and went crazy and destroyed everything around him and finally himself through his
Yes,
lethargy.
absolutely. And so after that, Lando discovers Miramir and Dathan's dead bodies. The trail is run cold. They bury them. Lando is distraught. Not only has he lost his daughter, but he's lost this child. He knows for certain that she's in the clutches of the Sith Eternal. Luke calms him down, convinces him to go to the radiation world, take a few days off. Luke returns to Ossus. We get a really good chapter of Luke interacting with Ben. We see even more cracks in his facade with Ben. Luke is only enforcing parts of the Jedi Code, and Ben being his Padawan on Ben. He's not making him cut his hair.
Yeah, Ben has
He's letting
long
him be
hair.
informal. And this is, there are two schools of thought to look at here. Is Luke in Legends, he becomes much less adherent to the old Jedi Order and creates something a little bit new where he lets Jedi marry and have attachments and have positive feelings and things like that. And so Luke does that in Legends. And in canon, he strictly doesn't do that, as he follows the old ways, and he talks about how Grogu can't have attachments. And so this right here shows him straddling the line, and I think that's what we see as the biggest downfall of Luke's order, is that, one, he didn't go through the attachments are okay route, even when his father was redeemed, even when he had attachments, and he was trained at such an old age that he had to have attachments. He had friends. He had loved ones. But he wouldn't let his order have those. But he would still have enough love for his nephew to not discipline him and let him call him uncle instead of master and things like that. And so we just see Luke's lack of discipline continue to hurt Kylo Ren. And Luke is just straddling between these two paths, and they would both work out had he followed one, but he follows neither. And I think that's an important part of the story that's only told in this one chapter, really.
Yeah, and it's such a travesty as a reader. You can see the writing on the wall, and that's why it's in here. Is that they're throwing a bone to us to give some of the first steps, first glimpses on what strained their relationship.
Absolutely.
And you can do a deep dive on this. You can say it strained the whole Jedi Order, because what potential does Grogu represent? Which that interaction took place before this in the timeline, correct?
Yes. Yep.
So, here's Luke Skywalker saying, "Let go of your personal attachments." When he had those benefits, he couldn't let go of Han Solo, so he went on his quest. Or maybe he was just being the savior like Jedi are. There's a lot to be said about this. And you got Grogu, and you got Ben Solo, and where's the right path? And so we keep getting these tastes of Luke Skywalker, and this was this was a dinner-sized portion of this book, right? And this is why it was so good. This is why I loved it so much, and why I hope we get tastes in Mandalorian and Book of Boba Fett or whatever, and I hope we get to see something. I hope this trickle doesn't stop, and I hope we get some meals here every now and then. Of Luke Skywalker and how this is developed.
No, I couldn't agree more. So we see, here at the end, Lando spends his week at on Comat's radioactive planet, and then he's ready to go hunt again. And he wants to go find the family. They find a lead on Pisana, and it's kind of quick how they find the lead, but it makes sense in the book. And so they find the lead. Luke meets him at Pisana. They search Ochi's ship. They can't find anything. Luke doesn't sense anything, and it's the Force telling him that they're not going to find the answer here. Because the Force ultimately controls what's happening in the galaxy, and the Force knows that the dyad's going to happen down the road, that Ben is going to help defeat Palpatine alongside Rey, and that this is not where the story is supposed to end. And so they don't find anything.
Yeah. Obviously, Skywalker can't find the dagger, which you think it'd be screaming at him or something.
Right, exactly. And so Luke's clouded, and he's not able to find anything. And so it ends with Lando deciding to stay on Pisana, and I really, really, really like a touch that the author puts in here. In The Rise of Skywalker, the dialogue implies that since this happened, Lando has been living on Pisana. That's 13 years. That's a long time to remove Lando, basically just from canon completely. And 2, that's just a long time to have Lando planted on a single planet. And so Lando's dialogue in this book says Pisana will be his base of operations to explore this quadrant of the galaxy. So Lando's now isolated to just whatever one quadrant Pisana is in, but we now have the flexibility for Lando to be in a few more tales in between now and the sequel trilogy, which I think was important. I think this was an important little piece of dialogue the author worked in there. And then Lando concludes the book.
Let's not forget
with an awesome homage to Solo and an awesome homage to the old Lando trilogy from Legends from way back, where he talks about the Calrissian Chronicles, and he delivers Shadows of the Sith as a Calrissian Chronicle, and it is a super cool moment.
Yeah, I think we'll see more of Lando. The reality is the Star Wars galaxy is a city. You can hyperspace jump anywhere you want, and you're driving from one side of town to the other, pretty much. Maybe a little bit of an under exaggeration, but not much of a stretch either. So hopefully we'll see him doing something else, because he can go on a weekend trip on the Halcyon or something.
Yep. No, you're totally right. I think this was an awesome book, man. I enjoyed it. It may be my favorite canon book. It takes my 2 favorite characters, puts them through an important story, gives us so much context surrounding The Rise of Skywalker and the rest of the sequels. It's a fun read from start to finish, and it's deeply connected to the universe through books and comics and the movies and all of these ties. It's been a great time.
And Legends, and and not knowing anything going into it, I feel like it's like watching a movie having never seen a preview or something. And like when that Darth Noctis lightsaber is revealed, when we get to like kind of a call out to the last shot and seeing these droids being made on a secret base, or having her corpse being reassembled, and Mirror being this excellent mechanic / slicer, able to steal these ships and escape as best she can and disable tracking devices and all these other things. All this stuff coalesces into a really top-notch adventure that, I listened to the audiobook, and I was just waiting every day I didn't stop. When I could, I listened to it a little bit at home, just walking around my yard mowing or something, listen to it in drives. But it's not like I sat there and took a couple of days off from listening to this thing. And it's produced really well, too.
Yeah, no, I totally agree. It is, and you listen to it, and I'm sure that it's a good audio production, like it always is. But it's just been a really fun. It was a fun adventure, and I think that this year, we're near the end of the year. We're not going to have any more Star Wars novels released this year, but man, I think all 5 adult Star Wars novels released this year were absolute winners. I know that you only read 2 of them, but I've read all 5 now, and I think that they were all winners. This was the best of the 5, but, I mean, they were all good. And so Star Wars novels are in a good place right now, and that's exciting.
Yeah, and so what's coming up? I hope they live up to this standard.
Absolutely. We just had a couple recent novel announcements with the Rise of the Red Blade, which is an Inquisitor novel, which I have to say does not particularly excite me, but obviously I'll read it. I'll pick it up, and I'll see what it's about.
And we'll talk about it on the podcast.
And then the Jedi Battle Scars novel, which will be the bridge between Jedi Fallen Order and Jedi Survivor. Explicitly, we'll learn how Cal gets his battle scars that he has in Jedi Survivor, but I think that this is going to give us a lot of information that we need, and so I'm excited to read this book. I think this is a good and exciting opportunity we have to read this book.
Yeah, I always want to see what's up with Cal Kestis, and I can't wait for that game to come out. It's, March of next year?
Yeah, so
February?
That's awesome. Let's roll right into the HoloNet news segment.
You made the HoloNet.
Star Wars Jedi Survivor, the sequel to Jedi Fallen Order, now has a release date, March 16th, and that was leaked by Steam. It wasn't meant to be published as far as we know, and it was leaked by Steam. We've also seen some Fallen Order. No, I'm sorry, we haven't seen it yet. We'll see it on Friday. Some Fallen Order gameplay, and it's going to be, not Fallen Order, I'm sorry, some Star Wars Jedi Survivor gameplay.
Yeah.
And it's supposed to be super exciting, and I'm so stoked for that game to come out.
That's this Friday?
Yes, that's this Friday. We should be seeing, no, I am sorry. It's supposed to premiere at the Game Awards, and, oh gosh, when is it supposed to premiere? I'm sorry, I should really have this off the top of my head. It's supposed to premiere tomorrow, not Friday,
good.
Tomorrow. Supposed to premiere tomorrow evening. We're going to get a peek at the gameplay for Star Wars Jedi Survivor. And so, you and I did a live reaction to that. We did a live reaction to the trailer. And so it was fun. I loved that game, and I can't wait for us to get some more info.
Yeah, we saw with the what's that race? Gosh, I'm drawing a blank. It's late at night. The Inquisitor. I know it's not him. What's his race?
Oh, his race? The Inquisitor's race?
Yeah.
Yeah, they're Powans.
From Utapau.
They're from Utapau. Yeah, they're Powans.
So it's another one of his old buddies or something. And
yes, yeah, it's another Powan. This one, I think there were rumors that he's a senator.
Yeah.
So he must be the Utapau senator, but we'll see. But yeah, he's going to be the big bad. We have the guy floating in the bacta tank that we don't know who he is. Lots of real cool, exciting stuff coming up surrounding that.
And so what else?
The other little tidbit of news. Go ahead.
No,
sorry.
I was going to say what comes next in the news today.
The other little bit of tidbit news we have is some new Lego sets dropping. We're going to get a TIE Bomber.
I want that.
Is going to get a remake. So that's going to be super neat. We haven't had a TIE Bomber come out in a very long time. And so this is going to be a good set. And then we're getting another, I think this is awesome. We're getting another 501st Battle Pack. Different armor prints for the 501st guys, a little bit different accessories, and a different little buildable. And so another really cool way to build your Lego 501st army. We just had a 501st Battle Pack come out 2 or 3 years ago, and it was on shelves for a while, but they're following up immediately with another one. I think that is super cool.
Yeah, and I'm opening up my Lego Advent Calendar, and as we speak, I've been playing with the LAAT gunship that came in that.
Yeah, I bet you've been having a great time with your Advent calendar. I bet that's your Star Wars moment of the week. But we have one more news story to cover before we get to that. And that one more news story to cover is the Bad Batch 2 trailer dropped today, and it was exciting. I mean, the Bad Batch Season 1 grew on me, and I ended up really liking it at the end. And I rewatched it, and I enjoyed it quite a bit. and the spiritual successor to the Clone Wars that the Bad Batch is, I really think that it's going to find its footing and fall into a niche soon in this season that makes it some really solid Star Wars that people are excited about.
Yeah, we could do an episode just on that 3-minute trailer. But to make it brief, I'm really pleased that Omega, it seems like she's grown. And so just as, from one season to another in real life with live actors and a child is depicted, they grow up between seasons. And so Omega has matured and grown up a little bit in this depiction as well.
She certainly has.
So,
and she was already of our kid Star Wars animated characters, Ahsoka, Ezra, and Omega. She already started out as the most likable because Ahsoka and Ezra were unbearable at the beginning of their shows. At least Omega was a little more bearable.
Right. Yeah, you can sympathize with the plight of all the clones, and she's one of them too. So.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, and then a bunch of new characters and conflict between the clones about Order 66, between the clones within the Bad Batch, Hunter and Crosshairs or something, or Crosshairs is still he's still kind of programmed, and I can't wait to see how that develops.
Yeah, no, absolutely, and we're going to see Commander Cody and Gunji and the Emperor and maybe Mon Mothma. I mean, it's just we're going to have a lot of.
I want to.
Bad Batch got delayed. Bad Batch got delayed a couple times, and I don't know what delayed it. I have no clue what delayed it. I don't know if anybody knows what delayed it. But something that's very exciting, I think, is the possibility that it was delayed because of Andor, because Mon Mothma was going to be in this, and they want to have a little bit more solid ties to Andor. That would be very exciting if that was the reason for the delay. And obviously, I mean, all the events in Andor happen after the Bad Batch. So anything we were going to see would need to be kind of a prequel to Andor. And it's not going to be anything heavy-handed at all. It's going to be a very loose connection if it happens, but it would still be exciting to see that tie-in right there for Andor to tie into an animated series. I mean, a show as exciting as Andor to tie into a show like The Bad Batch would be really neat to just see how seamlessly they can blend Star Wars.
Yeah, I can't wait. I'm going to be there watching every episode and trying to get my kids, encourage them to watch too.
Yep, absolutely. And so the last thing I want to touch on in the news segment is something that we cannot get into a long discussion about because it's all just rumors, but there are rumors floating around about upcoming Ahsoka and Skeleton Crew, their exploration of Thrawn and Ezra and new concepts, that if you want to check those out, check out our Twitter. We have a long Twitter thread about how all of this could possibly tie into the future. It's all speculation, and the article's all based on rumors, but it's still worth checking out, so you've got to go to our Twitter and just give that thread a read and let us know what you think about that. What you think about that thread and what you think about what we're talking about on there. It's SW_station to go check that out.
Yeah, that's a good thread.
So the last thing that we'll talk about here is our Star Wars moment of the week. And I think we got a little bit of a preview on yours, Colin, but why don't you tell us about your Star Wars moment of the week?
Yeah, Christmas is just around the corner. My family buys a bunch of different Lego advent calendars. And, of course, I get the Star Wars one. I got kind of
I didn't even know Lego made other advent calendars than Star Wars.
Yeah, my daughter has a Friends one. My wife has a Harry Potter one. My son has a Cities one. Yeah, Lego's a good company.
Oh, wow.
They know their target markets. So I was slightly disappointed. I think there's a slip up. I peeled back one of the doors and I had a clone trooper there. And in it was C-3PO. And I like C-3PO. C-3PO with a Christmas sweater that has R2-D2 on it. So I'm very pleased with that. Because it seems like a real cool little fun little piece. But I want a clone trooper, by gosh. He's probably in another door. We'll see. I'm not disappointed yet. But he's got yellow trim on him, supposedly. So we're going to see about that. I'm ripping open every other door just to see what happens.
That's great. That's great. I love those advent calendars. They're super cool. I've never collected one myself, but I really enjoy living vicariously through you, watching you pick those
well,
up
I keep them.
Every now and
I've
then.
got a shelf with last year's on it, and I had to go piece together the one before that. My kids got a hold of it, and I have to find those. But they're fun pieces, and they're usually functional. Last year's had the spring-loaded guns that shoot the plastic pieces and targets you can shoot them at. So it's really neat. The last year's had the Mandalorian with a scarf and Grogu and his floating bassinet. So it's really cool.
That's hilarious. That's very funny. My Star Wars moment of the week is just this week, or just the last 2 weeks, but culminating in this week. I got really into the Star Wars omnibuses, and not that many have been released yet. I think they've only released 5. They plan to release 3 more next year. And if you don't know what the Star Wars omnibus is, it's a giant collection of an ongoing series of comic books into one hardcover copy. So it's just a huge, thick book that's the same as a novel, but it's all the comic books compiled together. So I got the Darth Vader 2017 run, all 25 issues of that, plus the annual. I got the Darth Vader 2015 run, all 25 issues of that, plus Vader Down, plus the annual. And I got the first 37 issues of the Star Wars comic book that released in 2015, all collected together. And they're by far my favorite way to interact with and read Star Wars comics. It is obviously you have to wait a lot longer because the whole series comes out and then they'll produce these. But if you can wait, it is an awesome way to collect issues and an awesome way to read issues. And I have loved doing it. I've loved collecting these. I'm basically addicted now. Like I said, they've released 5. I have 3. I will not be picking up the canon omnibus because of the retcons that Dave Filoni put in there from the Bad Batch. And so, nothing against the retcons. I actually think Dave Filoni told the better story, but I'm just not interested in collecting the comic now. And then the other one is Dr. Aphra, which they're reprinting next month. And so I'll be picking that one up. War of the Bounty Hunters and Dr. Aphra Volume 2 will be the 3 that come out in relatively short order, and I plan to be getting all 3 of them.
Yeah, aren't the Darth Vader ones good? I got those comic books as they came out, and it's such a phenomenal story. There's some really choice panels in that.
It's a wonderful read. I mean, and yeah, like you said, the art is great. And just the huge fleshing out of the story behind Fortress Vader and the Inquisitorius and his discovering of Luke Skywalker, and just all of this weaving together has been really good. The Darth Vader comics are just a highlight of Star Wars comics in general. They have been, and they continue to be.
One of the most prominent stories in that is how Darth Vader gets his red lightsaber crystal and how that comes to be.
Yes.
It's such an interesting story.
Yes, it is. It absolutely is. So I encourage people to be checking out those omnibuses. But, Colin, that wraps it up for our episode of the Star Wars Station Communication Podcast right now. It was a little bit of a long episode, but we were happy to review this book. We enjoyed reviewing it, and we had a good time. We hope that you guys will give us a thumbs up on Instagram, Facebook, go like us on Twitter, follow us on all those platforms. Please give us a 5-star review for the podcast. Tell your friends about the podcast. The biggest way you can help us out is by leaving 5 stars, by letting people know that you enjoy our content and just helping us grow. We really appreciate you guys continually listening to us, and we have some really exciting things coming down the pipe.
Yeah, thank y'all for listening so much. This is a really good episode of a really good book. I hope you stuck it out this far, and we got a lot more coming on. Mandalorian recap, Bad Batch, and some more books.
Wonderful. Thank y'all very much, and may the Force be with you.